it's just beautiful. When people walk into this museum, they almost always say, I can't believe this is here. This is so well done. This is amazing. The compliments that they give to it from the moment you walk into the rotunda and you stand there looking at the 5 galleries, and you almost don't know which way to go first. And as someone who gives tours, I sometimes don't know which way to go first because I like so many things in all of them. And it's just so very well done. And I think that's what makes this museum really special, is that we all have stories and we all have artifacts, but it's how we use them and it's how we tell those stories to make people have that connection back, both to their past and to their present. And I think for me, it excites me too, because I can't wait to see what's going to come into this museum in the future as things continue to build and grow and evolve. So I would encourage everyone to be very mindful. If you're going to do something like this, tell your stories, and tell your stories in layers, because not everyone is going to spend the same amount of time. So finding a way to reach people who are moving through quickly or want to take more time is a really beautiful thing. The Masonic Museum was built to have 5 themed galleries. Out of the 5 galleries, 4 of them are permanent, and the 5th was intended to be more of a rotating display. That particular gallery is called the Everyman Gallery, the rotating gallery. What I love about that gallery is that it is designed for lodges and chapters and individuals to loan items to the home, either on a permanent or temporary basis. And we can tell different stories in that particular gallery. One of my favorite items is a gavel that was donated to or given to Polar Star Rose Hill Lodge in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was given to them by Samuel Clemens, who many people know as Mark Twain. It is a great example of something that a lot of people know Mark Twain, but they didn't realize that he was also a Mason. That's, I think, a really unique piece in the who it came from, but it's also very Masonic. Gavels are one of the things that you're going to find a lot of in our museum. The Leadership Gallery opens with our most famous Missouri Mason. President Harry Truman was a Missouri Mason, and he wasn't just a Mason, but he was Grand Master of Missouri Masons. And that means that he was the leader of this of Missouri Freemasonry. He was an active Freemason. He went to lodge his whole life, even while he was president, while he was coming back and forth from Washington as senator and again as president. He maintained that very strong connection to Missouri Masonry. So when you go into that gallery, you see a beautiful portrait that shows him as Grand Master in his Grand Master's regalia. You also have an opportunity to see his petition. That is what a Mason will sign and is presented to the lodge asking to become a Mason. So that original document is in there. One of the other really fun things in that gallery is that the museum has some special agreements with other museums in the state. An example of that is the Harry S. Truman National Historical Society. And we have a rotating loan with them, and so that means that we actually are able to display items from Harry Truman's house. One of the other things that I really love about the Leadership Gallery is that it features a connection between those individuals who were leaders of this organization. They were Grand Masters, but they were also leaders during a time of war. And we have 4 individuals featured in that. And there is a very strong connection between Masonry and service. Service to country is an overarching theme time and again. And so we also feature that specifically in that gallery. The Generosity Gallery, as its name implies, is about the generosity of Masons and specifically how that generosity created their oldest charity here in Missouri, the Masonic Home of Missouri. They believed in a place for orphans and for widows of Masons, and that meant physically a place for them to go. And so in 1886, they held their initial fundraising efforts in St. Louis. They raised the funds that became the seed for what would become the home. It did take a little bit longer for the home to open its doors, but it finally did in 1889 to a 12-year-old little girl named Della Gale Farthing. And it's a great example of just this amazing power of the collective when you have all of these men and women, Masons, Eastern Star members, and other appendant bodies in Masonry coming together to help someone that they may or may not ever meet, but they want to make sure that they have a safe place to live, for children, a safe place to grow up. And so generosity features really that beginning of the home, and some of the really important individuals like John D. Wenzel, who was Grand Secretary at the time that the home was created. He was a past Grand Master. He served as Grand Master during the Civil War. We speculate that perhaps creating the home and a place for orphans was near and dear to him because he was an orphan. And so that's an example of a story for an individual who felt passionately about helping others, and specifically children. Living Well Gallery is another gallery that focuses quite a bit on the home, but it opens with Laura Ingalls Wilder. She is what we consider one of our most famous Missouri Order of the Eastern Star members. She wrote the Little House on the Prairie books that so many of us remember as children reading, and written at the time and in the location where she would grow up to become a member of the Eastern Star and create an Eastern Star chapter. She was very involved. And Laura Ingalls Wilder is a great example of a female who really helped create her community, and on the Eastern Star side, which comes out of the Masonic fraternity, was a big part of that community as well. Another person that's featured in that particular gallery is one of my favorites, Noah Given. He was the original president of the board of the Masonic Home of Missouri, so that is an obvious reason why I personally am drawn to him. But in learning more about his story, he was a man that was very involved in his church, very involved in Masonry, very involved in his local schools. But what I did not know until I started to learn more about him and spend more time in the museum is there's this wonderful giant book in the museum, and it is from the World's Fair. He was actually on the committee that helped to build the Temple of Fraternity at the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. And it was a building where Masons and Oddfellows and all of those fraternal groups could come together, and they had this wonderful large registry that they all signed. And it's this kind of amazing little snapshot in time, 1904, and you see how all of these individuals came from all over the country to visit the World's Fair in St. Louis. The Patriots and Pathmakers Gallery is another one of my favorite galleries, and that one starts to broaden out the stories of Masonry, starting really with the creation of our country. And there's this beautiful mural. It's a replica of a mural from Washington, D.C., and it depicts George Washington laying the cornerstone of the Capitol. He is acting as the Grand Master in that ceremony at that time, George Washington was a Freemason who was also very, very active, took his oath of office as president on a Masonic Bible. And so it really shows how Freemasonry began literally with the beginning of our country. One of my favorite items in the Patriots and Pathmakers Gallery is William Clark's Masonic apron. William Clark became a Mason in St. Louis. Most people know William Clark as part of the famous Lewis and Clark expedition. They may or may not know that both of those men were Masons. Meriwether Lewis was a Mason when he became governor of the territory that we now know as Missouri. He established the first lodge in St. Louis, or what we now know as St. Louis. That lodge would not survive, but would be replaced by the lodge that then is where William Clark became a Mason. And there is this wonderful connection in history around St. Louis and the men who created it and Freemasonry. It was often said that Masons helped create the country and Masons helped create the state of Missouri. And as we came upon the 200th anniversary of the state of Missouri, it also happened to be the 200th anniversary of the Grand Lodge of Missouri. And so we asked the question, is it true? Did Masons really create both the state while they were creating the Grand Lodge? And the answer to that was yes. They absolutely did. And the Patriots and Pathmakers Gallery has an interactive display that really highlights that. And it shows you how men like Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, names that we know from our history books, they were there creating our state. The first governor, Alexander McNair, was a Missouri Mason. One of the first Supreme Court justices was a Missouri Mason. It goes on and on. Edward Bates was probably one of the individuals most responsible for creating the Grand Lodge of Missouri, writing its constitution. He was a Mason in St. Louis. He would actually go on much later in life to run against Abraham Lincoln. He lost that election, but then became part of Lincoln's cabinet of rivals. So you see how these men who created the state and created the Grand Lodge, they were Masons, and they played an integral role in those communities and in the state itself. And that is all featured and highlighted in that particular gallery. So there's a lot of information in there, and it has some of our oldest artifacts in the museum. We have documents that date back to those original lodges that created the Grand Lodge of Missouri. So it's a mix of information that you can get through technology, and you can also see those original artifacts from those original lodges. We all have all of these artifacts, and we have these photos, we have all these books and things, and it's important to preserve them. It's very important, but it's also important to share them. And with today's technology, there are so many different ways we can share them. So it starts in a museum, but then articles and magazines come out of that, and then posts online, and all of the different ways that we now have to spread the message of all the wonderful things that people did before us that can then also inspire us. Because now, what are we going to do? What is our legacy going to be for future generations? We can learn from the past and take all of those good things and carry them forward.